Mike pushed open the front door and dropped his bag by the entrance. He called out for Buddy, his golden retriever, and heard a soft whine from the living room. As he stepped inside, he froze. Buddy sat on the rug, his ears perked and tail thumping. But beside him knelt a small figure wrapped in silvery fabric. Mike's heart pounded as he stared at the girl's smooth, pale skin that shimmered faintly under the lamplight. Her large dark eyes blinked at him, and she reached out a delicate hand toward Buddy. The dog leaned forward and nuzzled her fingers, then gave her a reassuring lick. Mike's single quotes, his mind raced. Last he had checked, his dog was alone at home. Now here was a stranger who looked as if she came from another world. He swallowed hard and cleared his throat. "Hey Buddy," he managed, voice uneven. Buddy looked up, then back at the girl as if to say everything was fine. The girl gave a small, hopeful smile. Mike forced himself to move forward, every step. Feeling heavy, he knelt at a safe distance and offered his hand slowly. She glanced from his hand to Buddy, then reached out and touched his palm. Her skin felt smooth and cool, unlike anyone Mike had ever met. Mike rose and backed toward the kitchen. "Water?" he asked, grabbing 2 glasses. The girl nodded and followed his gesture. Mike set one glass on the floor and filled it, then held the other out to her. She drank shyly, her throat making a faint gurgle before she wiped her lips. With a slender finger, Mike noticed her eyes flick toward Buddy, who was now lying beside her, watching every move. Mike took a deep breath and filled a small bowl with leftover chicken stew. He placed it next to her. She hesitated, then leaned forward and took a bite. Her eyes widened in surprise, then softened in gratitude. The room was silent except for faint kitchen sounds and Buddy's breathing. Mike glanced at his phone and considered calling someone, but who? The authorities might scare her, and his friend Jen, the amateur astronomer, might know something about aliens. But first he had to make sure the girl was safe. He lowered himself onto the couch and watched her, unsure what to do next. Buddy trotted over and rested his head on her knee. She closed her eyes and leaned against him. At that moment, Mike felt a strange mix of fear and wonder. After a few minutes, the girl finished the stew. She set the empty bowl aside and gave Buddy a gentle pat. Mike's curiosity took over his hesitation. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a notepad and pen. Using basic shapes and simple words, he wrote, "What is your name?" He held up the pad. The girl read silently, then wrote a reply, "Era." Mike smiled, relief washing over him at the normal sound of the name. He wrote back, "Where are you from?" She paused, then sketched a small star, a planet, and a tiny craft. Mike nodded, understanding that she must have come from a distant world by ship. Ara's gaze drifted to the window where the moon hung low in the sky. She looked frightened, as if waiting for something. Mike put down the pad and knelt beside her. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're safe here," he whispered. Ara's eyes filled with tears, and she leaned into Mike's shoulder. Buddy lifted his head and nuzzled her hair, as if comforting a close friend. Mike felt a swell of protectiveness. He gently patted Buddy and said, "We'll figure this out together." The night grew darker and the house felt strangely quiet. Mike's thoughts spun with questions. Who chased her? How had Buddy found her? Did her people know where she was? He decided to wait until morning to seek help. For now, he would keep Ara hidden. He stood and walked to the coat closet, pulled out a soft blanket, and draped it around her shoulders. She smiled weakly, the first time Mike saw genuine warmth on her face. Buddy whined softly, and Mike scratched behind his ears. "Good job, Buddy," he said softly. Buddy wagged his tail and returned to lie at Ara's feet. Mike looked around the living room, imagining how strange this scene would sound if someone told him a week ago. Yet here it was, his loyal dog comforting an alien girl who had stumbled into his life. He felt a strange excitement mixed with responsibility. He would protect this girl, learn her story, and help her find her way home. As he switched off the lamp and drew the curtains, Mike whispered into the dim room, "We're not alone anymore." Buddy let out a content sigh, and Ara closed her eyes, finally at ease. Outside, the night held its secrets, but inside Mike's home, a new friendship was taking root, one that would change his life, and perhaps the fate of 2 worlds, forever. Mike woke before sunrise. Stirred by Buddy's soft whine, he blinked at the dark room and saw Ara curled under the blanket in the guest chair. Buddy lay at her feet, snoring quietly. Mike slipped out of bed and tiptoed to the kitchen, careful not to wake her. He filled the kettle and set it on the stove, then opened the fridge. He found bread, eggs, and juice. As the water boiled, he arranged 2 plates on the table and laid out simple food while the kitchen light glowed softly. Ara stirred and rose, rubbing her arms as if to clear sleep from her mind. Mike offered her a glass of orange juice. She looked at it curiously, then sipped slowly, her lips curling into a small smile. Mike pointed at the bread and egg and said, "Breakfast, Ara." Repeated the word in a gentle voice, "Breakfast." Mike nodded and encouraged her to try a piece of toast. She bit carefully and closed her eyes as if tasting something new and comforting. Buddy stood behind her and nudged her back, reminding her that this was home for now. Over breakfast, Mike tried to learn more about Ara. He showed her simple drawings. He made last night a picture of the earth, a stick figure of himself, and another of Buddy. He wrote beneath each, "Earth, Mike, and Buddy." Ara pointed to Earth and made a sad face, then pointed to her chest and traced a star. On her notepad, Mike understood that she missed her home planet and missed her ship. He felt his chest tighten with sympathy for the girl who trusted him enough to cross worlds for safety. Mike decided to contact Jen, his friend who studied astronomy. He needed help understanding Ara's origin and how to get her home. He took his phone and typed a quick message, "Urgent, need help. Strange guest at my home, can you meet?" Within minutes, Jen replied, "On my way, be careful, send pic." Mike snapped a photo of Ara drinking juice beside Buddy and sent it. Jen responded with excitement and caution, "I think she's alien. Protocols exist, but we stay safe. Bring her to park, I'll explain." Mike looked at Ara, unsure if she would understand why he needed to move her. He pointed at the window and made a walking motion. Ara read his gesture and nodded. Mike wrapped her in the blanket again and led her downstairs. Buddy sprinted ahead, tail wagging. Outside, the air felt cool and fresh. Mike held Ara's hand gently as they walked to his car. Buddy ran around them in circles, guiding their steps. The world was still quiet, with only early birds singing as they drove to the park. Mike tried to teach Ara the word friend. He pointed at Buddy and said, "Buddy friend." Ara repeated, "Buddy friend." Then he pointed at himself and said, "Mike friend." She smiled and touched his arm. Mike's heart warmed at the trust she showed. Buddy lay in the back seat, head resting on Ara's lap, offering silent comfort. Mike glanced in the mirror and saw her looking at him, with big eyes full of hope. That they reached the park just as Jen arrived. She wore a dark jacket and carried a small backpack. Jen greeted Mike quietly and knelt beside Ara and Buddy. She examined Ara's hand and wrist, noting slight bruises. Ara winced as Jen gently pressed a spot on her arm. Jen pulled out a small first aid kit from her backpack and cleaned the bruise, then wrapped it with a sterile pad. Ara watched, impressed by Jen's calm and careful movements. Jen pulled Mike aside. "She's exhausted and dehydrated," Jen whispered. "We need to rest and get water. I can access contacts who handle unusual cases, but it takes time. For now, we protect her." Mike nodded, feeling relief that Jen understood. He returned to Ara and offered her bottled water Jen had brought. Ara drank deeply, then leaned back against Buddy. The dog closed his eyes contentedly, as if he knew the girl was safe. A distant rumble made them all look up. Overhead, a low-flying drone hovered between the trees. Its lights scanned the ground in slow sweeps. Mike's heart raced as he realized it might be seeking Ara. Jen held out a hand and signaled them to move behind a row of bushes. They crouched low, Ara pressing close to Mike while Buddy growled softly at the drone. The machine paused, hovered, then continued its sweep, moving slowly away from the clearing. Mike exhaled and wrapped an arm around Ara. She pressed her cheek to his shoulder, trembling. Jen whispered, "We have until nightfall before more arrive. We must plan." Mike nodded, determination settling in his chest. He looked at Ara's pale face, so far from home, yet so brave. He squeezed her hand and whispered, "We'll keep you safe." Buddy licked Ara's hand, as if to promise the same. The sky brightened as the sun climbed higher, casting light on the three friends hidden in the park. Mike realized their journey had just begun, and though challenges lay ahead, he would not let fear rule him. With Buddy by their side and Jen's guidance, they would face the unknown together and find a way to guide Ara back to the stars. She came from. Mike felt the weight of responsibility as he and Jen led Ara and Buddy through winding paths. At the edge of the park, the drone had disappeared, but Mike knew it could return at any moment. He gently squeezed Ara's hand and pointed toward a small maintenance shed they had seen earlier. He mouthed the word safe and Ara nodded, her eyes wide but trusting. They slipped around a clump of bushes and reached the shed's side door. Mike tested the handle. It was unlocked. He pushed it open slowly and stepped inside, his heart pounding. The room smelled of oil and damp metal. Jen flipped on her phone light, revealing old crates stacked in corners and dusty tools on shelves. Buddy padded inside and pressed close to Ara, his body offering warmth and comfort. Mike found a narrow bench beneath a broken window. He guided Ara to sit, then sat beside her. Jen could not stay hidden here long, she whispered. We need supplies, water, food, maybe blankets. Also, we need to secure the door. Mike nodded and rose. He rummaged through a crate and found a worn tarp and 2 old jackets. He handed one jacket to Ara and wrapped the tarp around the doorframe to block light from outside. The shed felt safer already. Outside, leaves rustled. Mike froze, listening. Jen raised a finger to her lips. The sound continued and grew louder. Mike peered through a crack in the door. It was only a stray cat. He relaxed and exhaled. Jen smiled and whispered, "We should rest here till dusk. Then we move to Jen's safe house. It is closer to my lab and has more security." Ara looked between Mike and Jen, uncertain. Mike knelt and wrote safe house on his notepad, then drew a small house with a lock on the door. Ara studied the drawing, then drew her own picture of a star and a heart. Mike's chest warmed. She was saying she trusted them with her heart. He nodded and smiled. Ara returned the smile, her relief clear. Time passed slowly. Jen checked her watch and declared it nearly midday. Mike realized they needed food. He offered Ara a granola bar and some water. She drank, then took small bites, her expression curious. Buddy lay beside her, watching protectively. Mike and Jen shared a sandwich quietly. Jen whispered, "I'll go now and bring supplies. Stay here with Buddy." She patted Mike's shoulder and slipped out the door, but Mike stayed close to Ara, careful to speak softly. He pointed at Buddy and made the word friend again. Ara repeated it, her voice soft and musical. "Friend." Mike smiled and placed his hand over his heart, then pointed to her. Ara touched her chest and said, "Ara." Mike touched his chest and said, "Mike." Ara laughed softly at the new word and Mike realized she was learning quickly. Suddenly, a low hum echoed outside. Mike froze. Buddy lifted his head and growled. Mike pressed a finger to his lips, signaling silence. They both listened as the hum grew louder. A small, unmarked drone hovered near the shed window, its orange scan light circling. Mike's stomach clenched. He tugged Ara's sleeve and pointed at the shed entrance. She grasped his hand, fear in her eyes. Mike looked around. The old crates were heavy enough to block the door but would take time. He whispered, "Brace." He and Ara stood side by side. Buddy stepped forward, fur bristling. As the drone's light hit the door, Buddy barked loudly and charged it. The drone's lights flickered and it jerked upward. Mike grabbed Ara and ducked behind the bench. The drone veered away, confused by the sudden noise, then shot off down the path. Mike's single quotes art pounded. He reached for Ara's hand and squeezed. Ara's breathing was quick. Mike whispered, "Safe." She nodded, tears in her eyes. Buddy returned and nudged both of them, tail wagging slowly. Mike patted Buddy's head and said, "Good boy." Jen returned moments later carrying a small backpack and 2 paper bags. She rushed inside and closed the door. Mike helped her stack crates against it. Jen set the bags on the bench and opened them. Bottled water, energy bars, flashlights, and a small first aid kit. Ara's eyes lit up at the sight of fresh water. Jen spoke softly to Mike. "We stay here until tonight, then we head to the safe house." Ara looked at Jen and spoke her first sentence. "Thank you." Mike's eyes widened. Jen smiled and replied, "You're welcome, Ara." Jen handed Ara a water bottle. Ara drank deeply, then offered half to Buddy. The dog lapped gratefully. Mike realized how much Ara and Buddy cared for each other, as if they had known one another forever. The afternoon sun climbed high, and the shed grew warm. Mike wiped sweat from his brow and wrote another note. "Rest." He pointed to the ground and patted his lap. Ara sat beside him, and Buddy sat on the other side. They formed a small circle of safety. Jen perched on a crate and monitored the door, listening for any sounds. Mike watched Ara close her eyes and lean against Buddy. Her breathing slowed. He stroked her hair gently, careful not to hurt her. He thought of her home planet and feared for her family. He whispered, "We will bring you home," though he did not know how. Ara stirred and opened her eyes. She looked at Mike and smiled, an expression filled with trust and hope. As shadows lengthened outside, Jen checked her watch again. She announced softly, "Time." Mike helped Ara to her feet, and Jen handed her a flashlight. Buddy bounded up and nudged them toward the door. They moved quietly through the bushes under growing darkness. The park was nearly empty now. Mike led them toward Jen's car parked a few blocks away. The drive to the safe house was tense but uneventful. Ira pressed her forehead against the window, watching fading streetlights pass by. Buddy lay beside her on the seat, head resting on her lap. Mike glanced at her and whispered, "Soon, you will be safe." Ara looked at him and mouthed, "Thank you, friend." Mike felt tears prick his eyes at her simple words. They pulled into a quiet street. Jen guided them to a nondescript house with shutters closed. She tapped a code on the door panel. The door clicked open. Inside the house was warm and filled with soft light. Jen led them to a small living room with blankets and pillows on the floor. She turned on a lamp and said, "This is safe house. You rest here." Ara sank onto the blankets, and Buddy lay across her legs. Mike sat nearby, exhaustion and relief mixing in his chest. He offered her more water. Ara nodded, and Mike smiled. Jen closed the door and checked the locks. She joined them on the floor and whispered, "We stay here until dawn. Then we plan how to get you home." Mike leaned back against the wall and watched Ara and Buddy. Their bond was clear. Two lost souls finding comfort in each other. Mike realized that in helping Ara he had found a new purpose, and Buddy had found a friend beyond any he had known. The safe house was silent now, but inside Mike's heart, a new mission had begun, to help a small alien girl return to her distant stars, and to protect her as fiercely as Buddy watched over her. Mike woke before dawn to the soft hum of the safe house's heating system. The room was dim, and Ara lay curled under a thick blanket with Buddy nestled beside her. Jen sat at a small table in the corner, typing on a laptop. Mike slipped out of bed and padded across the wooden floor to join Jen. Together they studied a map of the night sky and compared it to Ara's drawings of her home constellation. Jen pointed to a cluster of stars and whispered, "This might be where she comes from." Mike traced the pattern with his finger and nodded, determination shining in his eyes. As the first light of morning filtered through the window, Ara stirred. Mike offered her a cup of warm tea. She sipped it slowly, her breathing easing with each taste. Buddy watched her calmly, his golden eyes filled with compassion. Mike handed Ara a small notebook and pen. She sketched her ship's shape, sleek, silver, with 3 curved wings. Mike studied the drawing, then wrote beneath its signal. Ara nodded and pointed to her small crystal pendant. Mike realized she planned to use it as a beacon. Jen stood and stretched. "We need to test the signal," she said quietly. She packed the laptop and a small transmitter into her backpack. Mike knelt beside Ara and spoke softly. "We go to high ground." Ara repeated the words and grabbed Buddy's collar. They left the safe house together, stepping into the cool morning air. The street was empty except for a stray cat crossing their path. Buddy chased after it playfully before returning to Mike's side. They drove in Jen's car to a hill, overlooking the city lights still fading in dawn. Mike carried Ara carefully up the slope, while Jen followed with the transmitter at the top. The grass was wet with dew. Mike set Ara on a flat rock and helped her turn the crystal in her hand. Jen connected the crystal to the transmitter with thin wires. Mike watched nervously as Jen typed commands on her laptop. The crystal glowed faintly, pulsing in rhythm with the transmitter's signal. For a moment the valley below lay silent, then distant lights flickered in the sky, moving in a deliberate pattern. Mike's heart pounded. He whispered, "Look." Ara raised her eyes to the bright points growing closer. Buddy sat beside her, ears perked and tail thumping. The lights formed into a familiar shape. 3 ships matching Ara's drawing. They hovered above the city, scanning for the signal. Mike felt awe mixed with relief. One ship descended and landed on a cleared field near the hill's base. Mike helped Ara down carefully, then knelt beside her. Jen packed her equipment and approached them slowly. The ship's hatch opened with a soft hiss. Inside stood a tall figure with luminous eyes and silver skin. Ara's eyes filled with tears of joy as she ran forward. The figure knelt and wrapped her arms around Ara. They spoke in a gentle language Mike could not understand, but the tone was full of gratitude. Ara turned and waved at Mike and Jen. Mike felt a lump in his throat. He waved back, not trusting his voice. The alien placed a hand on her pendant and spoke a word that echoed faintly. The pendant glowed brighter, then dimmed. The figure nodded to Ara and turned to Mike. Though their language was unknown, the emotion was clear: thanks and respect. The alien raised a hand in a gesture of peace. Mike offered his own hand, and the alien touched it gently. They stepped back, and the hatch began to close. Ara ran to Mike and hugged him tightly, pressing her cool cheek against his. Buddy leaped up and licked her face, making both humans laugh through tears. Jen patted Buddy and said softly, "Good job, Buddy." Mike held Ara's hand as she climbed the ramp into the ship before she disappeared inside. Ara whispered, "Friend." Mike repeated it and smiled, tears wetting his cheeks. The ship's lights pulsed once. Then the hatch closed and the engines powered up with a gentle roar. Mike, Jen and Buddy stepped back automatically. The ship lifted off and hovered, then shot into the sky, leaving a trail of shimmering light that faded into the morning. Mike watched until the sky was empty. Jen placed a hand on his shoulder. "You saved her life," she said. Mike nodded, feeling both joy and emptiness. Buddy rested his head on Mike's leg, offering comfort. They walked down the hill together. As the sun rose higher, Mike looked at Buddy and said, "We did it." Buddy wagged his tail and barked once, as if in agreement. Mike glanced at Jen and offered a tired smile. She smiled back and said, "Let's go home." Mike patted his dog and led the way, knowing that life would never be the same, but that moments of kindness could change entire worlds. Mike woke to the sound of Buddy's soft snore beside the bed. Sunlight slipped through the curtains in gentle beams. Life had settled into a quiet routine since Ara's departure. Mike still kept the small crystal pendant on a hook by the door. It glowed faintly each morning as he opened it. Buddy would nudge Mike's hand, asking for their usual morning walk. They stepped outside together. The air was fresh and cool. Buddy bounded ahead, chasing a fallen leaf. Mike smiled and put his hand on the pendant. It felt smooth and warm against his palm. He wondered how Ara was and if she had reached home safely. Jen had returned to her lab, promising to stay in touch if any news arrived. For now, Mike and Buddy walked the familiar streets, but their hearts felt different. Back at home, Mike brewed coffee while Buddy waited by his feet. Mike held the pendant up to the light and saw tiny flecks inside it. They sparkled like stars. He placed it on the kitchen table. Buddy nosed the pendant gently, then looked up at Mike as if to remind him of its power. Mike nodded and patted Buddy's head. He poured a cup of coffee and sat down, but he found it hard to focus on his work. Jen called in the afternoon. She spoke quickly and quietly. Mike could tell she had news. She said she had translated Ara's signal logs. Ara's people had recorded each moment of her time on Earth. They had learned about human kindness and loyalty through Mike and Buddy. Jen paused, then said the logs included a message for Mike. "Friendship spans stars." Mike's eyes filled with tears. He told Jen he would display that message next to the pendant, a reminder of their bond. Later, Mike met Jen at her lab. Buddy sat calmly at their feet. Jen showed Mike a screen filled with alien symbols and shapes. She had arranged them into simple words in English. "Friendship spans stars," she repeated, pointing to each word. Mike memorized the phrase and felt its truth in his chest. Jen said Ara's people hoped to visit Earth one day, to learn more and to repay the kindness Mike had shown. They asked for Mike and Buddy to guide them. Mike felt honored and nervous. He looked at Buddy and said, "Do you want more adventure?" Buddy wagged his tail as if to say yes. Mike turned to Jen and asked, "When will they come?" Jen checked her notes and said it could be months. The alien fleet traveled slowly between worlds. She suggested they prepare. Mike agreed. He would gather supplies, and Jen would work on safe protocols. Buddy would practice guiding visitors through the house for the next week. Mike began planning. He cleared space in his garage and built simple furnishings from spare wood. He placed mats on the floor and a low table for shared meals. He hung soft lights that would feel warm to alien eyes. Buddy supervised each step, sitting beside Mike and wagging his tail whenever Mike hammered a nail. Mike spoke to Buddy as he worked. "Make it cozy, Buddy, so they feel welcome." In the evenings, Mike and Jen met to study Ara's home language. Jen printed pages of alien symbols and their English meanings. They practiced simple greetings and polite phrases. Buddy sat under the table, head resting on his paws, listening as Mike repeated each phrase in a careful voice. Jen smiled at the sight and said, "Buddy understands more than we think." Mike laughed softly and agreed. One night, Mike polished Ara's pendant and placed it on the low table in the living room. Buddy curled at his feet. Mike lit a candle and sat beside the pendant. He whispered, "Are you listening?" The crystal glowed softly and cast dancing lights on the wall. Buddy's ears perked. Mike placed his hand over the pendant and felt a gentle hum. It lasted only a moment, then faded. Mike stared at the glowing light and realized it was a promise that their story was not over. The next morning, Mike and Jen received a secure message from Jen's contact in the Space Liaison office. The message said that an advanced scout ship would arrive in 2 days. Mike's heart raced. He prepared the guest area and arranged fresh towels. Buddy carried a small bowl in his mouth and placed it by the entryway as if to greet visitors with water. Mike patted him and said, "You're the best host, Buddy." On the second day, Mike stood at the door with Jen and Buddy. The crystal pendant lay on the small table between them. A shimmer of blue light appeared in the sky above the street. Mike's breath caught as a single scout ship descended. Buddy barked joyfully. Mike felt awe and pride. The moment had come to welcome Ara's people, to repay his kindness with open arms. As the ship's door opened, Mike stepped forward, ready to show that friendship truly spanned the stars. Mike stood at the front door. As the small scout ship's ramp touched the ground, Buddy paced at his heels, eager and alert. Jen stood beside Mike, holding a tablet with translated phrases. The scout stepped off the ramp. It was tall and slender, with smooth silver skin and large gentle eyes. It held a small device in its hand. Mike swallowed and offered his hand in greeting. The scout nodded and placed its hand against Mike's, a sign of peace. Buddy barked softly, then wagged his tail, and the scout knelt to stroke Buddy's head. Buddy leaned into the touch and closed his eyes in contentment. Mike invited the scout. Inside, he held the door open, and Buddy bounded ahead, leading the way. The scout glanced around the living room, taking in the soft lights and low table. Mike motioned toward the table and said, "Please sit." The scout sat on a cushion, its long legs folded neatly. Jen stepped forward and spoke slowly into her tablet. "Welcome to Earth. Thank you for coming." The tablet played the alien words back, and the scout responded through the device in its own language. The tablet translated, "We honor your kindness, friend Mike." Mike felt a swell of pride. He offered water in a crystal glass. The scout accepted it, sipping carefully. Buddy lay beside the scout, head resting on its knee. The scout gently patted Buddy's head and whispered words Mike could not understand. Jen's tablet translated again, "Your dog is a noble companion." Mike smiled and scratched Buddy behind the ears. Buddy wagged his tail so hard that his whole body shook. The scout's eyes glowed softly, and Mike realized this simple moment bridged worlds. Jen guided the scout to the guest area, showing the mats and blankets they had prepared. The scout examined each item and nodded approvingly. Mike showed a shelf with books and drew attention to a book of Earth pictures. He flipped to a page showing dogs in nature. The scout pointed at Buddy and then back at the page. Smiling, Mike pointed to Buddy and said, "Friend." The scout repeated the word in its own tongue, as translated by Jen, "Friend." Outside, golden sunlight filtered through the windows. Mike beckoned the scout to follow him to the garden. Buddy raced ahead, barking at butterflies. The scout knelt to observe a flower, touching its petals gently. Mike picked another bloom and offered it to the scout. The scout held the flower to its chest and smiled, a gesture of gratitude. Jen translated its words, "Your world is beautiful." Mike felt wonder at the scout's reverence for Earth's simple beauty. As they walked, Mike explained basic Earth customs. He pointed to the sun and said, "Day." He pointed to the moon and said, "Night." The scout repeated each word, learning quickly. Buddy chased a leaf that fell in the breeze, and Mike laughed. The scout watched in delight, and Jen translated, "Your companion brings joy." Mike brushed grass off Buddy's coat and said, "Good boy." The scout reached out and patted Buddy once more. Careful and respectful. Back inside, Mike prepared a simple meal of bread, cheese, and fruit. He placed plates on the low table. The scout sat and inspected each item. Buddy sat patiently, watching. Mike handed the scout a slice of apple. The scout tasted it and then closed its eyes in pleasure. Jen's tablet translated the scout's words. "This taste is new and delightful." Mike offered cheese next, and the scout accepted it gently. As they ate, the scout activated a small projector and displayed images of Ara and the rescue on the wall. Mike watched as scenes of his home, Buddy's brave chase, and Ara's reunion played in soft light. The scout's voice filled the room through Jen's tablet. "We watched and learned. Your actions saved a life. We are grateful." Mike felt tears in his eyes and nodded. Buddy winced softly and nudged Mike's hand. Jen asked the scout for information about its mission. The scout tapped its device and images appeared. Maps of star lanes, a distant homeworld, and a small colony ship. Jen translated, "We come to observe and learn. We carry messages from many worlds." Mike realized this was more than a courtesy visit. It was a step toward interstellar friendship. He said slowly, "We will help you." The scout bowed its head in thanks. After the meal, Mike showed the scout photos of Earth's landscapes on his phone, forests, mountains, rivers. The scout's eyes widened at each image. Buddy sat beside him, looking up with curiosity. Mike clicked through the pictures and said, "Earth." The scout repeated the word, and Jen translated, "Earth is wondrous." Mike smiled and patted Buddy. He felt hope that this meeting could change both worlds. As dusk approached, the scout asked to rest. Mike led it to a soft mat and draped a blanket over it. Buddy curled at the scout's feet. Jen showed Mike the translated schedule. Scouts arrive Tomorrow with more visitors, including Ara's family and leaders. Mike took a deep breath. He looked at Buddy and whispered, "We will be ready." Buddy lifted his head and licked Mike's hand. Mike and Jen cleaned the kitchen quietly while the scout slept. The house felt calm and full of promise. Mike glanced at the crystal pendant on the table. It glowed softly in the dim light. He touched it and thought of Ara. Buddy followed him and nudged his hand. Mike knelt and hugged Buddy's neck. He whispered, "We did well, friend. Tomorrow is a new day." The night settled over the house. Mike and Jen sat together in the living room, reviewing plans on the tablet. Buddy lay between them, exhausted but content. The scout rested peacefully in the guest area. Mike realized that in sharing simple acts of kindness, water, food, safe home, he had opened a door between worlds. And as he closed his eyes that night, he dreamed of a future where Earth and alien worlds shared friendship, guided by a dog named Buddy and a man who believed in kindness above all. Mike woke early to the sound of birds outside the window. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, painting warm stripes on the floor. He stretched and glanced at Buddy, who lay curled at the foot of the bed resting after yesterday's excitement. Mike smiled and patted the dog's head. Today would be the most important day, yet Ara's people and her family would arrive. Over breakfast, Mike and Jen reviewed their plans. Jen spoke softly as they sipped tea. "We have a schedule. First arrival ceremony, then guided tours, last communication session." Mike nodded, his heart steady but eager. Buddy sat beside him, eyes bright and attentive, as if he understood every word. They opened the front door to find the scout waiting. It rose and bowed respectfully when it saw Mike and Jen. Mike returned the gesture and stepped aside. Buddy barked a cheerful greeting. The scout patted Buddy's head and smiled. Mike led them outside, where a clearing had been prepared with simple mats and cushions. Soft lanterns hung from tree branches, their light warm even in daylight. A low hum filled the air as three larger ships descended in formation. The grass rustled as gentle winds blew. Mike felt his chest tighten with anticipation. Buddy growled softly, not in anger, but in alertness. The scout motioned with its slender hand, and a ramp extended from the central ship. Out stepped Ara, her eyes shining as she ran forward. Mike's breath caught. Ara embraced Mike tightly, her arms firm but gentle. Buddy pressed against her leg, tail wagging wildly. Jen watched with a proud smile. Behind Ara, two taller figures emerged as parents. They wore robes of soft silver fabric that shimmered in sunlight. Their faces were kind, though their wide eyes held a mix of relief and solemn respect. Ara's mother knelt and placed a hand on Buddy's head, whispering words in her gentle tongue. Buddy closed his eyes in contentment. Mike watched, moved by the tenderness between them. Ara's father stepped forward and bowed to Mike and Jen. Mike bowed back, feeling both grateful and honored. Jen tapped a phrase on her tablet, projecting, "Thank you for saving our daughter." The father's eyes glowed with gratitude as he repeated the words in his own language. Mike guided Ara's family to the mats. Buddy led the way, sniffing the cushions before lying down beside them. Mike offered water and fruit. The aliens accepted politely, sipping through small, silver cups. Jen translated each word. "Your world nourishes us." Mike felt a warm pride at the simple gift of Earth's food. After refreshments, Mike led a small group tour. He pointed to the garden and said, "This is home." He showed them the living room with the low table and lanterns. He introduced Buddy as friend, and Ara's mother petted Buddy gently. Ara's father picked up a book of Earth photos and flipped through images of forests and mountains. Jen translated, "Your world is beautiful." The aliens nodded in agreement, their expressions soft with wonder. As the afternoon sun moved, Mike led them to the park hill. Buddy bounded ahead, eager to show favorite spots. At the top, Mike pointed to the city skyline and said, "People live here." Ara's mother studied the buildings, her face thoughtful. Jen translated, "You build with careful design." Mike nodded and spoke of Earth's many cultures. The aliens listened closely, asking gentle questions through Jen's tablet. Down the hill, Mike directed them to a small river nearby. The water moved calmly over smooth stones. He showed how to touch the water gently and listen to its sound. Buddy drank at the edge, then shook off droplets, sending small sprays into the air. Ara laughed, and Mike felt joy at her happy sound. Jen translated, "Your companion finds delight in simple moments." The aliens smiled, their eyes bright. Back at the clearing, Mike gestured to the lanterns and low table. He offered simple gifts he had prepared, a leather collar for Buddy with a small silver charm resembling Ara's crystal, and a framed drawing of Ara, Buddy, and Mike under the stars. Ara's mother accepted the gifts with gentle tears in her eyes. Ara's father took the drawing and traced each line with careful fingers. Jen translated, "We carry your kindness in our hearts." As the sky turned pink with dusk, the three ships prepared to depart. Ara held Mike's hand and pressed a small device into it. Mike recognized it as a communicator. Ara whispered, "Call me friend." Mike nodded, tears shining but his voice firm. "Friend." Buddy pressed against Mike's leg, sharing the moment. Ara's family stepped onto the ramp. The scout joined them, giving a final nod to Mike and Jen. The ramp retracted, and the ship's engines hummed softly. Mike watched as each ship lifted off, their lights pulsing in rhythm. Buddy barked once, then settled beside Mike, gaze fixed on the sky. When the ships were gone, Jen placed her hand on Mike's shoulder. "They will remember this day," she said. Mike nodded, voice soft, "And we will remember them." Buddy let out a content sigh and leaned into Mike's leg. Together they walked back to the house under the rising stars. Inside, Mike hung Ara's drawing on the wall and clipped the communicator next to the crystal pendant. Buddy nosed each item, as if approving. Mike sat beside the low table and whispered, "Our friendship spans stars." Buddy closed his eyes, and Mike felt a calm warmth fill his heart. That night, Mike, Jen, and Buddy sat together under the lanterns in the living room. They spoke quietly of the day's events and the promise of future visits. Outside, the earth was still, but Mike knew his world had grown larger and kinder because of a dog's affection and an alien girl's trust. And as he drifted to sleep, he dreamed of stars bridged by friendship, guided by the gentle loyalty of his companion, Buddy.